Hello, and let's talk about transitions this time. Now, the transition system, very different than it originally was in the Sandbox, and I'll explain how it was and how it is now, and obviously you'll be able to see from that just how much more useful it will be to you now. But to start off with transitions, let's actually physically do some transitions. So right now I'm going to just chuck myself into, I think, zorilya. There we go. So, you can see the system position updates every single time you go to a new sector. So this is system position x5, z5, and this obviously represents your x and z coordinate. So if I move north, it'll be x5, z6, and continue on. The event start and event end, don't worry about that, it's just a couple of diagnostic things for me so I understand exactly when things are happening and how to use them from there. Zorilya might look a little bit different from one of the other videos if you've seen it, or if you go and look in one of the other videos, because I've since changed the planets and reshot that video as well. But anyway, we are in Zorilya, and with the previous system you used to be able to move north, south, east and west. And that was all very good, but you also had to wait for sectors to load in properly, because if you transitioned too quickly to another sector, all of the stuff that was being generated in that sector might bleed over into the next sector, and you would end up with a very messy circumstance. So I've made it so that you can transition very quickly, and stuff like that doesn't happen, or at least not nearly so much. I mean, I've tested it quite extensively, and it's only happened with asteroids maybe once or twice, and it's something that you can deal with. And this is outside of normal use, but now you can transition diagonally as well, so you don't waste so much time going left and up to try and go diagonal. So let's move diagonally, shall we? Let's move me there. Let's go to the helm. And when you move diagonal, you might expect this to be the case, but trust me, it wasn't that easy to sort out. It also sort of remembers your position as you move diagonally, rather than just cramming every single ship that's moving into one point in space on the diagonal. It does a pretty good job of remembering where you are. So I'm going to go and move it into the lower side of this transition, and I will pop out here in sector, what would that be, 4-6? Yeah, 4-6. So there I am, nice and low part there. And here we are, x4, z6. And the same is true if I go in up here. You can see we're being generated into a new sector here, and we're stuck there. So previously, without a little bit of the workarounds and the utilities I've been building, everybody would just get mashed into one point in space, and it was kind of nasty. And you can also see that we're transitioning into a sector which right now is completely procedurally generated. It's a scarring sector, and there's very little going on in it, but as we move through these sectors, nebulas and asteroids will pop up. There's also the scope within the sector generator, which we'll talk about later, to just generate an entire almost infrastructure within a system. From stations to the security of the sector and conflict happening within the station, within the sector, based on all the stuff going on there. But we're here to talk about transitions. So we've moved diagonal. You can also move up, down, left, and right, of course. Now, let's talk about the layout of sectors, because that's kind of important when considering the transition system. So previously, I just got the cheat sheet because I've put it right down at the bottom. Oh, not so good. Alright, so these are the layouts of the sectors, and this may look completely messed up, and I understand. Don't cringe just now though. Now previously, these four sectors right here, these are Dionysus. In fact, I will do this instead here. So let's take me to a blank sector. Let's stop the ship. There we go. Take me to a blank sector. Blank system. And here we are at 0-0 in a blank system. So for these 4 4x4 grid here, the 16 here, I'm going to use them to represent the system of Dionysus as it was previously, and by extension the transition system at large. So it used to be a case that this would be sector 1, this would be sector 2, and it would go round in a circle, and then we go inward. So it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then 13, 14, 15, 16. Kind of messed up. Doesn't make sense to me. I would have thought if you were going to make a spiral system, you would spiral out the way, so you've got you've got room to expand, and it will never go below 0 in terms of the sector number. But that wasn't the case. And not only that, but it made a convention impossible. Well, maybe not impossible, but very, very hard to put together for transitioning of systems with a small amount of events. So what I mean by that is, we're in sector 1 here. If we go north, we're in sector 14. If we go north from sector 2, we're in sector 3. If we go north from sector 12, we're in sector 13. And if we go north from sector 11, we're in sector 10. These, you can't do the same maths to make to come to the same conclusion for each one of those, and that's a problem. So I standardized it, and with that I also made it a lot more flexible for you scaling the size of your system. So this essentially, you would just define, if you want to make a new system, you would just define the size of the edges. So you would define 4 by 4, and then what you do, what the game does now is it has one set of events for transitioning from every sector. So where previously this sector required an event for the obviously an event to generate the sector, an event to transition left, and to tell the game exactly what the sector is there, an event to transition north and tell it what sector it's going to, an event to transition, and so on. You need an event for each one of those, and all of the code that comes with that getting pasted in there as well. Now it's just a case of you define that sector, and there is you define all your systems, and there is one set of events that handles transitions through all of the systems. So now we are over, even just over a 4 by 4 grid, which is far smaller, as you can see, than some of the systems I've got defined just now. Even just over a 4 by 4 grid, you save yourself 16 times 4 events, which is a huge amount of processing if you think about it. So and also based on that, we now have this system updater. When you move position, it tells you, and you have the ability, if you want to, for it to tell you and to log the position in the ship's comms. So here we go, nav computer update 00, nav computer update 73. So if the players are moving around, they get a chance to know where they are and know where to move. Next, now, with all that in mind, and the random sector generator, or the procedural sector generator that you'll be told about, I'll be explaining later on, I've been able to define, separate sectors, distinct sectors, like all the sectors in Dionysus. So this square here represents the sectors in Dionysus. So if I just go there just now, actually, let's go to Dionysus, I believe, 1, Dionysus system, let's go for that. So it's moving me there. I'm going to be right next to Dionysus outpost, and stuff's going to start spawning. So now I'm in sector 10. So X1Z0. So this is Dionysus. I'm in X1Z0. That's the starting sector right there. So if I go north, I add so we've got sides here of 0 to 7, which is 8 by 8 this grid is. And so if I go north, all I do is add the sector maximum. So I'm adding 8, gets me to 9. If I go north again, I add 8, gets me to 17. And if I go north again, it gets me to 25, and so on. So you just add the sector side maximum to go north, and you remove it to go south. And if you go east or west, you just add or remove 1. It's kind of simple. And you might be asking yourself, what if you go south when you're here? I've got that covered, it's okay. So 8 by 8 gives you 64 sectors, so 0 to 63 is 64 sectors. If you go south and you are in negative space, as in the sector you've asked to go to is a negative number, then you add the maximum number of sectors. So if I'm at 1 and I go south, I will be at -7, and then if I add the maximum number of sectors, is that right? Yeah, it is. Then if I add the maximum number of sectors of 64 to -7, then I end up at 57, and I'm all good. So if I go south here, it'll take me 57. And if I go north here, and it's above the maximum, it's above or equal to the maximum number of sectors, as in 64, because there is no sector 64, then you take away the maximum number of sectors. So from 57 plus 8 would be 65, and then, is that right? Yeah, plus 8, 65. And then you take away 64, getting you to 1. So it works both ways that way. And the way I have worked it for left and right, if you're moving east or west, and the row changes, and the way you define the row is you take the sector number and divide it by the sector side. So like 13 divided by 8 is 1 remainder something, yeah, 1 point something. And because of the way numbers are truncated in this system, it would just be 1 that it would resolve to. So this would be row number 0, because 0 divided by 8 is 0, 0 divided by 1 is 0, 0 divided by 7 is 0. Sorry, what am I talking about? 7 divided by 8 is 0, 1 divided by 8 is 0, 4 divided by 8 is 0. So this is row 0, and then row 1, and row 2, and row 3. If the row changes when you move east, then you know that you've gone outside the bounds of your sector, yeah? So with that being said, what you do instead is remove the sector edge maximum. So this would be 8. So if I'm at 7 and I go to 8, and then I remove 8, I'll be at 0. And if you go into negative space, or if the same thing happens, if you go down a row when you're moving west, then you add that same number. So you would be 0, -1, plus 8, 7. You end up there. For the diagonal transitions, it's slightly different. But all you've got to do is sort of account for the maximum possible number you can go for. So if you are in 63 and you try and move up diagonal to the right there, northeast, then you add the edge maximum, taking you to 71, and then you add 1 because you're moving east as well. So it'd be 72. And 72 is the maximum you can ever get to. So it is defined as your sector maximum sectors plus the sector edge side. So 64 plus 8, 72. If you ever are in that sector, then that's the only way you can be in that sector is if you have either moved yourself there specifically, or in which case you'll be there, or if you have moved there from sector 63 and moved northwest, at which point you will just go straight back to 0. And you can do the same sort of logic for 0, because if you move down diagonal here, you will be at -9, I think. Yeah, you'll be at -9. And if you're at -9, that's the farthest you can go, that's the farthest extreme you can go in negative, so you must have done it from 0, so then you go to 63. And the way it works for 56 and 7 is if you are transitioning and the road doesn't change. If you move either one of these sort of northwest or southeast and the road doesn't change, then you know you are going from corner to corner. Because think about it here, if you move southeast and you take away 8 from this, and you take away 9 from this, so you'd be going. No, you wouldn't be taking away 9, you'd be taking away 8. And then 7 because you'd add 1. So south is take away 8, so you'd be -1, and you add 1 because you're going east, so then you'd be at 0. And the row hasn't changed, and so something is wrong. At which point you're like, okay, you must be going this way. And the same is true of 56. If you're trying to go that way, then you're going up, taking 1 away, so you end up at 55. So you end up at 60, 63, what was I on about? You add 8, 64, take away 1, 63, you end up there, something is wrong, so you just go there. And everything else is fairly easy to deal with. So all the transitions mean that regardless of where you go, if you go outside the boundaries, you will be reflected onto the other side of the galaxy, or the space. So just as an example, and so it's nice and quick, I'm going to move us back to the blank sector. Oh, I've just messed up. Let's do that again. Blank sector. There we go. Back to the blank sector. We are at 0, 0. So from 0, 0, just going to move diagonal down to the right. We should be at 9, 9, because this is a 10 by 10 sector. There we go. 9, 9. Let's move us back. There we go. And then if I move us to sector 9, which is at the bottom right hand corner of a 10 by 10, and then I move us this way, we should end up at sector 90. There we go, sector 90. 0 to 9 rather than 9-0. And then if we go backwards, obviously. But there we go. And since we're here, if we're in sector 9 and we go up to the right, I would expect us to be in sector... what am I thinking of? Shit. This is sector 10? Yeah, be sector 10. There we go, sector 10. And from sector 10, since we're on the far left here, so sector 10, if you go up diagonal, you should be in sector 29. Let's do that. There. Boom. So it'll be 9-2. There we go. So, hopefully from that you can trust me that it works. And I've tested it a lot. So a 10 by 10 sector is very easy to understand, especially from the coordinate system that pops up when you transition sectors, because 10 by 10 means that a sector X5 and Z5 is sector 55, literally. Whereas if you are in this system here, or anything that is not a multiple of 10, you end up going, this is sector X4 Z0, so it's sector 4, but if you move to sector 12, then it is sector X4 Z1. So it's not sector 14, it's sector 12. And so you have to really use this a little bit. Now, on top of that, let's go back to Dionysus. In fact, no, let's go back to Zorilya, because it's easier to show you there. Actually, you've already seen Zorilya, so Dionysus time. So back to Dionysus, we're in sector 1 of Dionysus, right here. And all of the square there is defined Dionysus space. All of this space is undefined, and I'll show you how I've done that in a second. So undefined space, I want to go there. So I'm going to go south from Dionysus Outpost, which is here, to take me to sector 57. Let's do that. I'm not going to fly because it takes too long. Can't be bothered. So south from Dionysus Outpost, here we go. So here we have a sector that is generating, and you can see it's given us a station. Now the station generator is kind of in its infancy, so if something messes up, I apologize, but it's going to be very much similar to the ship generator and how it works. And so these guys for some reason taking ages to get their descriptions, but they should get them at some point. But we have a Halcyon research center here, a research station. And this is a completely blank sector, very strange. So let's move over here to sector 58. Let's see what pops up. There we go, got a nebulous sector. And you might be thinking this doesn't make sense. It was a completely blank sector. How come we've got asteroids and nebula here? I totally agree with you. I'm still in the process of making this system be a bit more persistent, so that, well, not persistent. Intelligent, so that when you move sectors it kind of thinks, okay, what was in that last sector? Let's only change it a little bit. But once again, we're in a civilian sector, and the reason we're in a civilian sector is because this is Dionysus, and I've specifically set it to be owned by civilians, or operated by civilian entities. So here we have Tiberius Warehouse, and again the description is not done in its infancy, but we have a Tiberius Warehouse, and we have a Halcyon repair dock. And then we have Halcyon's science and research vessels down here. And both of these guys are known as reliable informants. Isn't that lovely for them? 59. So what I'm trying to get here is that we're still in Dionysus, but if you go into uncharted space, it's currently being generated randomly. And that's kind of fun, and it means that I don't have to do too much work here. If you're defining a new system, like I did in Zorilya here, I only defined this sector and this sector, 43 and 55. The rest of it is completely random space. But what that does is it allows for a GM to, or even just allows for players to just fly around and encounter different things everywhere. So you can tell a story much more easily without having to do too much work. And the great thing about the sector generator is you can define, just like with the ship generator and things, you can define as much or as little, define as much or as little as you want. So you can make a sector look very similar every time, set its density, set how many ships it's got, how many stations it's got, whether it's in conflict, whether it has a trade lane, where that trade lane is. You can do all these things, or you can let any one of those be left up to chance, and for it to give you a random feel. And then on top of that, once you generate the sector, you could add your own flare, you could add your own individual things that you need to be there, like specific stations, specific objects, so that you'll get a different backdrop to your story-specific items that need to be there, yeah? And so let's jump back to the game. So now in the nebula sector, there are no stations, but we still have a couple of vessels flying around. Let's move one more sector before I go through the sector generation code to show you how this sort of stuff gets defined. So civilian traffic control, Tyroton Corp Customs. And then we have a bunch of civilian ships popping in. So, hopefully you can see how that would really benefit, you know, even yourself, just exploring around. I know me, as I'm flying around, I'm looking at stuff going, oh, that's cool. And just, you know, flying around and seeing what's new. And that's part of, like, the reason why people play things like Skyrim sometimes is just for the exploration. And so procedurally generated universes have that appeal. But this isn't technically a procedurally generated universe because it's not persistent. Anyway, let's get into the code as to how this works. So, transitions we've talked about. Let's talk about the code of them now, okay? And then we'll move into the sector code. So for every ship, we have ship events which check transitions. So we have like transition timers here. I think we've gone through the timers before, but if check transition state is not off and the transitions have not changed, then we set it to off. So it really should be I should have explained the first one first. So start checking transitions. If transition state is not on, and the transition state hasn't changed recently, and half tick state has happened, which is one of the timers, then we set it to on. And when check transition state goes on, this happens. We do micro checks. If check transitions is on and do micro checks is on, which gets set here. It kind of gets set back and forth here. Then we are setting every individual ship check for going west, south, northeast, southeast, southwest, and northwest, and the wormholes. We're setting them all to be checked. Okay? And when all these are getting checked, or when all these are triggered off to get checked, this is just a check for no ships. When all these are set to getting checked, they are all, like, there's a bunch of events that check all those for each one of the ships. So it checks whether each one of the ships is within a certain box for, say, going north. If it's in the north box, then that ship says, yes, let's go north. If it's not in the north box, then that ship says, no, let's not go north. And it collects all those, and Harak, if Harak says yes to going north, first of all, sorry, if no ships equals 0, as in there are ships, and we're checking transitions, and all ships go north is not yet on. So we're not yet going, yes, we must go north. Then we check to see what all the ships say about it. And if all ships, if Harak says yes, we're going north, and the Pequant says yes, we're going north, and the Ulit says yes, we're going north, and so on, then all ships go north is true, at which point we trigger movement. If any one of those things is not true, if the Reina Maria says no, then all ships goes north, is 0. Same for west, same for south, same for east, northeast, all that good stuff, and wormholes as well. So, continuing, here are the checks for the ships. So this is the Harak. If the Harak does not exist, and the transitions are to be checked, and we have set the north check in the micro checks, we set the north check to be checked, then, and Harak go north is not 1, then we want to set every single one of their checks, every single one of the Harak's checks to be 1, and all of the checks that we're being checked for to 0, because the ship doesn't exist. So it should in no way impede the gameplay for transitions. So if I don't have a Harak, the Harak needs to be saying, yes, let's go north, east, south, west, every which direction, whichever way you want to go, guys, because I'm not here. And there's no point in doing the checks afterwards. However, if the Harak does exist, we check, see if it's going north. And we check to see whether it is in the bounds of the north box. So I've got a little variable here, NS box min and NX box X max. NS is north-south, and so I've got essentially the extremes from from the left to the right of the width of this box for north transitions, and they are somewhere in the region of, I think, 15,000 to 85,000. So this is the width of the box, and you can see the depth of the box here, or rather the height of the box is -500, which is in here, to 3,000, which is about here. So a sliver of space about this wide, about this big here, is checking to see whether you're touching it. And if you are touching it, if you're not touching it, if you're outside the box, then Harak go north is set to 0, because it doesn't want to go. If you are touching it, if you're inside that box, then Harak go north is set to 1, because you do want to go. The same is true for east, south, west, northeast, southeast. Oh, they're quite interesting actually, the northeast and southeast ones. So in order to get that same sliver of space, just like that, rather than one big box, essentially you just take one box away from another box. So if first of all the Harak is outside of the big box that is the corner. Oh, let's do that again. So this box is about this size. If the Harak is outside that box, then it doesn't want to go northeast, quite clearly. If the Harak is inside that box, but outside of a different box, which is inside it. So just to try and visualize that again. Big box, if it's outside that box, then we're not going. If it's inside that box, it needs to check whether it's in this space, because if it's in this space, I don't want to transition yet, I want to wait till they're there. So another box is this size over that original large box. Yeah? And so if it's in both of those boxes, then don't transition. If it's outside of the smaller box, and so it's in this space here, because it's still in the bigger box, then transition. That's how we take one box away from another box. Alright, and the same is true for all the rest of the corners. And then the wormholes. If we're within the wormhole thresholds, which you can set, then and that is scaled around the X and Z position of the actual wormhole itself, so it's a square around this space, then we're transitioning through the wormhole. If not, then we're not. Very simple. Same for each one of the ships. So you can see this is for the Cadence, and then the Piquant, and then the Reina Maria, and just page down to get them all done. So Ulysses, Svoboda, there we go. So that's all the transitions, the individual transition checks for all of the ships. Now once all that is done, if all ships go north equals 1, then we're at this sort of area here. So actually I need to find the all ships go north. Here we go. All ships go north. Let's go down. So here we go. Transition events. Now I told you previously every sector had a set of these, and they were much more complicated than this because they had other checks in them and stuff, which it was a huge if you want to go see it, go have a look at the original Sandbox. You'll see that every event for transitions was like hundreds of lines long. So this transition event here, for going north, if all ships go north equals 1, which is checked, we've already just gone through that. If all ships go north equals 1 and free flight toggle is on, this is something you can toggle in game to tell the game whether you want the players to be able to transition. So in the G menu, you have number 6, which is transition requirements. Toggle travel, sector travel on and off. That is changing the variable I was just talking about. And the other one for transition requirements, sector clear. That is toggling whether you need to clear the sector of enemies, essentially, or rather clear the sector of fleets in general. So I tend to keep this one off, but it's there if you want it. And so there's the free flight toggle and sector clear. If free flight toggle equals on and sector clear equals not 0, and the reason I've done that is because you can set, well, the sector when it's not clear is 0, when it is clear is 1, and when you force it to be clear it's 2, or anything other than 1 or 0. So yeah, not 0, and move ships equals 0, which is north. Oh sorry, which is not north, it's not set at all. If move ships is not set yet, then we set move ships to 1, and that's going north. And then for northeast it's 5, because it's, if you can imagine once again a box, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Okay. So going north is 1, northeast is 5, east is 2, southeast is 6, south is 3, southwest is 7, west is 4 and northwest is 8. And that just triggers off an event for moving ships. And so, going back up, I need to I need to go back to where I was by all ships north and going up. Boom. So move ships, here we go. If move ships equals 1 and the transition state, set transition state to 1, so we know that we're transitioning to some extent. And then we set the ship generation event and the sector generation event. These are 2 events which are used to spawn sectors. We set them to both 0. And then we set all ships go north to 0 because it's currently 1 and we don't want, once we've moved, another transition to happen. Otherwise we'd be transitioning for days. And then we set the position of the ships to be the opposite end of the sector. And we reset the transition checks, and when we reset the transition checks, we end up like all of those transition checks for for each one of the ships that trigger here, they all get set to 0, every single one of them. So again, we've got no chance of double transitions. And if you wanted to, actually, you could just check that. There it is there. Reset transition checks. When that gets set to 1, everything gets set to 0, and then we set it to 0. And then we set sector to the same value as move ships. So if move ships equals, let's go back to north. If move ships equals 1, then set sector gets set to 1 because it's move ships, and then move ships gets reset. And set sector, let's do that. Wait a minute, is that the reset? Is that what I'm looking for? It is what I'm looking for. Good stuff. Set sector. Alright, it's right here. So set sector. If set sector equals 1, then and adjust sector number is 0, then we're going to essentially get a test sector. We want to make sure that wherever we're moving to, we get a chance to test whether it's the right place first before we actually move there. So test sector equals our current sector number. So if we just take, for example, I'll go back to this. Take, for example, we're in sector 7, and then we add our current sector number 7 to the system edge size, which for this is 8. That would give us 15 as a test sector. Then we'd go through adjust the sector number. And adjust sector number does all this. It gets a sector difference, so it's the difference between our test sector and our current sector. The test row, it divides the test sector by the system edge size, giving us that either row 1, row 0, row 0, row 1, row 2, row 3, whatever. The current row does the same with our current sector, so we can tell the difference. It gets the row difference because it takes test row away from current row, and it gives us our max sectors, which is edge size times the edge size. So all of those required things for adjusting the sector number. And then if we are if set sector is greater than 0, as in it's set, but it's not, it's everything but but east or west in this instance, then requested sector. Oh yeah, if it's okay. If we're going east or west and we're on the same row, so the test for the row here, test row equals current row, then we're good. That means that we're not outside the bounds and we can just set the requested sector number to test sector. And once requested sector number is set to anything other than the sector that is currently on, we know we're changing sectors, and so a new sector is spawned. If it's not the case, if we end up on a different row, then we need to remove the extra. We need to remove the edge size, so we end up at the back. I've explained all this before, sort of pointing at this grid here. So if we move this way and we are no longer in the same row because we've been in sector 8, then we know we need to remove 8 from that to get us to 0. So this is the adjustment. This is a sector adjuster. Essentially, it takes that test sector, adjusts it in the way I've described before, so that we're going to be in a sector in the space that we have defined, or the space that we've allotted, rather than defined. And then from there, once that is done, sector adjustment all finished, we set sector reset. So every single time it gets through here, we've adjusted it in some way, we've set the requested sector where we need it to be, and then we reset the sector setter, and it can all happen again. So So that may have been a complete blast of information, I apologise. But if you're interested again in this sort of stuff, go and have a look at it. One last thing to talk about is how to define sectors. So let's go to Dionysus again. Dionysus, there we go. NGC 1142. In fact, yeah, okay. NGC 1142. We're in Sector 16, what was known as Sector 16, but in fact we are here. Sector 18. So remember what I said, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way around the edge, and it went 13, 14, 15, 16. We're there. We're in Sector 18 essentially. Hence why it says here requested sector number equals 18. So for defining a sector, you make sure that the sector change state is not 0, so it is changing. The system number is your correct system. So this is actually meant to be, well, I mean a total different version of Dionysus, so give me 2 seconds while I get into the correct version of Dionysus. Sector 01. Oh, I'm not typing sector correctly. Sector 01. There we go. So, Dionysus Sector 1 now. Changing, of course. Sector number, sorry, system number is 1. It's the correct one there. Then the requested sector number is 1, because that's this sector obviously, but the current sector number is not the same as the requested sector number, hence we're changing. Then Dionysus, we want to give all the players a big message on their server so that we can tell them where they're going. These two, don't worry about them just now, but they're used for something different. They're used for other features. Kill all. Now the kill all, ow, I just hurt my hand. Kill all at the bottom of the script triggers off the massive kill code. Now this kill code used to be like copy and pasted literally into every single transition event, and I explained before that's 4 times 16 transition events just for Dionysus alone. This is a silly amount of code to copy and paste. So I put it into one spot, and when you trigger kill all, this happens. So first of all it gets set to 0 again, and then it destroys everything that you have defined for your game. So this is for all sectors, everything, anywhere, anytime, just to be as all-encompassing as possible. Also kills anomalies, black holes, wreckage, all of the monsters, and a ton of space objects which were previously used for some other stuff. And then it sets kill cycled to 1. So now I know that that's cycled once. And I'm doing a double clear. I want to do 2 clears because I want to make sure that whenever this happens, nothing is left behind. So, kill cycled equals 1, double clear state goes to 1. And then we wait for a half tick state at that point, where when double clear state is 1. And once the half tick happens, we set double clear to 2. And then we wait for half tick to go off, and then we set it to 3. And then we wait for half tick again. And the reason we're doing this is we're waiting for at least half a second, a whole, like an entire half a second to have passed. And when we hit that half second again and double clear state is 3, then we make sure that kill cycled is 1. We set kill all off again and kill cycled to 0. And then double clear state goes to 4. And then as soon as kill cycled has been reached again, so this is the second time it has gone through, then all killed equals 1. We know all killed is finished. And then create sector. So after that gets done, that's all being set off. Kill all is happening. We also set create sector to 1. And then there's something up at the top here that gets triggered by every single sector. So once we're creating a sector, we wait till all killed has happened here, and then set them both to 0 so they can be used again. We set a delay timer, the delay timer state to 1, so that it just... A delay timer state is something I use for menus, but it's also kind of useful to make sure that things don't happen twice sometimes. So that just gets set there. And then the ship generation event numbers get set to 1, and this sort of starts them off. So this happens to every sector. So now we're back in Dionysus. Oh, that's the in-between sectors. Now we're back in Dionysus. The sector generation event number 1 is here, so we're waiting for that. Current sector is 1, so we're obviously in the right sector. We create a couple of stations, and then we increment sector generation event. So that now equals 2. Skipping over the ships just now, when it's 2, we have something else happening. We're creating some asteroids, and then we increment it. And then 3, we create some more asteroids, and we increment it. And then for 4, we're creating nebulae. And then 5, more. 6, more. 7, there is more. And that's the end of this sector. And then you saw in the middle there the ship generation number. So that's something else that gets set to 1 in that this thing here. Ship gen number gets set to 1. So then the ships are spawned. So we're defining the position, or we're getting a random position for a ship, and then telling it to spawn, and then we're incrementing the ship generation number. So this is the same kind of structure as the sector generation events. And so you can see that it takes a few events to spawn a very specific sector, but that's pretty much what it takes. You need the listening event for the sector itself, and then you need to obviously to create the sector. And the create sector event sets these sector generation events off, and then you just create a sort of ladder of events for generating things within your sector. And this is just one sector. It's an awful lot of code, but it is far, far less than it used to be. So you can specify as many as you want, with as much stuff in there as you want. The reason I stagger asteroids and nebulae is because if they all try and happen at once, sometimes they crash the server. And the same is true with ships, because the ship generator is only one set of code and it needs to cycle through. However, the most interesting part I think is the fact that there's all this space with random sectors in it. So let's talk about the undefined sectors. This will be the last thing. I apologize for taking up so much of your time. But yes, Dionysus here. So Dionysus has got all of its defined sectors, but it also has uncharted space. So first of all, if the system number is 1 and system attribute set is not equal to the system number, then we set the system attributes, and in this one it's system edge size of 8. So this is where we set the size of the system for the transition system to understand our parameters. Our perimeters of the system that we can't go past. And this could be set every single time. So when I go into system number 2, there's a different one of these events, a tiny little event which sets things about the system. And you could put other stuff in here. You could put who owns the system. You could put the general security level of the system, that sort of thing, if you wanted. And then we set the system attribute set to the system number so it doesn't happen again. And if we've transitioned to uncharted space, we're going to obviously check to make sure we're not on any of the defined sectors. So looking at Dionysus once again, defined sectors are 0, 1, 2, 3, 8, 9, 10, 11, 16, 17, 18, 19, 24, 25, 26, and 27. Every single one of those is being checked for here. So as long as if we're in the right system, and we're not in any of the defined sectors, or the requested sector number is not any of the defined sectors, and we're also changing sector, then we're going to create an uncharted space sector in Dionysus. And so that is the big message you get. Kill all gets set off, and then create Dionysus uncharted sector gets set, rather than create sector. And the reason for that is there's just a couple of extra things which happen here. So it's very, very similar to that create sector event, this create sector thing here, except in create Dionysus uncharted sector, I have things like sector faction, the infrastructure level, security level. And the reason these are here is because I wanted to be able to adjust them dynamically in this event if I wanted, if I chose to. But you could really just do that event if you wanted. So anyway, the sector events, the sector ship number gets set, so there's always going to be like a pair of ships at least, or 0, or if any ships that pop up, there are going to be pairs of ships because they're in uncharted space. Why would they travel around alone? And then generate sector. Now generate sector, we'll go on to that. It'll probably be the next video, in fact, I think. But generate sector is the sector generator, and right now, having defined a bunch of this, sector generation happens. So that then creates the uncharted space, and then we can do that continuously as we move through sectors. And that's the real power, I think, of this system, being able to have this uncharted space and fly through it and use it as your storytelling mechanic. So I said earlier on that there are also times where you might want to define a little bit of the sector and then leave the rest of it uncharted, so it's a bit more random. Why have I spelled that wrong? Eolia. There we go. So in Eulia, I have 2 sectors that are defined. Going back to here, it's 55, 43. Looking at these now, 55 is entirely defined, just like Dionysus sector 1. So we set the system attributes here, first of all, so it's system edge 10, so it's a 10 by 10 sector, and then we create sector 55. We have planets in there, we have nebulae, and this is the other thing I want to talk about, this xeno encounter space. So we create a sector of wild space, or at least call it wild space, and then we use the same technique that we normally do for random sectors to generate a sector. So you can see we're describing the faction, we're defining the faction, the infrastructure level, security level, and the sector ship number, and then generating a sector. That's all cool. On top of that, since we're setting these event numbers to 1, we use that to our advantage to set specific things. So we have, in a specific place, there are a couple of monsters and an anomaly, and that is always going to be in that sector regardless of what happens behind it, whether it's a big nebulous sector, whether it's a huge asteroid sector, whether there are like a bunch of anomalies, other anomalies in the sector. These anomalies, these specific story things are always going to be in the same place, and so kind of powerful, kind of useful that way. And then we have the in-between sectors, again, just like Dionysus, is set with a few different attributes to them. Okay. So that's an awful lot of talking, guys. We've done the transitions now, and I've explained a little bit about the generating of sectors, and how this system allows us to just traverse massive amounts of space that can be randomly generated, or slightly, procedurally generated, or like very loosely defined space, allowing you to sort of free up yourself to just be part of the creative process rather than having to wrestle with this language. So, yeah, see you in the next video, I guess. Oh, you'll hear me in the next video, I guess. Goodbye.